Well, why a prophecy update? Some of you that have been here for these before already know the answer to that question. Here's one passage of Scripture that gives us an explanation why we do this. Because there are a number of folks, a number of churches that, a number of pastors, when I talk to them and they say, so you got big plans for the new year? I said, yeah, we'll have our prophecy update conference. Prophecy update conference, what's that? Well, we do a year in review. Everybody likes a year in review show, right? You go over the things that you saw, but then based on that, what do we expect to see in 2016? That's where it gets interesting, right? What we expect to see in 2016. One of the challenges that we face today as believers, and those of you who call Calvary Chapel Lima your home, this is not a surprise in the least. One of the challenges that we face today as believers is deciphering all of the information that we receive. We truly do live in what has been dubbed the information age, don't we? It seems like we get inundated. In fact, you could say we have information overload. There's just so much data and information out there to consider that it's hard to understand which to believe and which to discard. Well, with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can do that. So let's start with some of the things that we saw this year, predominantly in America. And this is what, if you would listen to the news, which I don't, but if you would, you probably shouldn't, but if you did, these are the stories that they wanted to convince you were the most important stories, bar none. The most important issues that we face as Americans today, if you listen to the mainstream media, would be Bruce Jenner. I refuse to call him Caitlin. Bruce Jenner. And the media would have you believe that that was a very important story for America. And then, of course, how can you forget June the 26th, 2015? What's that a picture of? The White House, and it is lit up to represent what? Yeah, that's right, LGBT. And that was, and by the way, that was lit up the evening of that. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in a couple of hours. They had to prepare for that. This was known well in advance, and everything was set up so that when the decision came down, which I happen to believe they knew in advance, because when you blackmail people, it's easy to get the decision you want, which is exactly what happened, by the way. Then you get that. That was the most important story. Now, in a sense, I would agree with that. That was a decision that this nation will regret. That's a decision that the church will live to regret. There are some that are supporting that. And then, of course, the never-ending drumbeat of sexual immorality. That was hailed as a breakthrough. I'm not really going to go much into that. What was the mainstream church's response to all of that? Well, there's America's pastor apparently having a grand old time with Mr., or shall I say Sir Elton John. You know, Queen Elizabeth knighted him. Sir Elton John happens to be a homosexual activist.
Mike, who's the pastor that's with you?
Rick Warren.
Okay.
Rick Warren is the pastor there in that picture. So America's pastor yucking it up with Elton John, that's a good symbol of the church's response to that, the mainstream church. Notice that I was very careful to say mainstream church. Certainly wasn't our response to that, but we're not mainstream. But just as soon as you call Rick Warren America's pastor, somebody would object and say, no, wait a minute, there's America's pastor. Right there. So they're competing, and I won't even go into the title of the book. That's The Power of I Am. Pretty strange stuff. Here's my response to all that from Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Things are upside down in America today, brothers and sisters. We are living those days that the Bible foretold. The day would come when people would call good evil and evil good. Well, we're there. We're there. So, what was some of the big news this year in America? Pope Francis visiting. That occupied every news channel cycle for weeks on end. His September visit to America, that is he's laying flowers there at the 9/11 memorial in New York. He was there to address Congress, and he was there to address the UN the next day. And of all the issues that the Pope could talk about, the most important issue for him was what? Anybody? Climate change. Yeah. Climate change. Our very own president has said that climate change poses the greatest global threat to humanity. That's our own president. So the Pope occupied a lot of the news cycles this year. And then we had this doozy of a set-up propaganda, affectionately known as the Clockboy. This really was a false flag, if you understand what false flags are. And I understand now that he's found a lawyer who's going to file a lawsuit for some reason. And
What was this about? I didn't see it.
well, this young man here is a Muslim who carried a suitcase to school that he had built to make it look like a bomb, and then they called it, but it's just a clock, i.e. Clockboy. You remember the story? Yeah. Oh, it was huge, huge. Oh, and did I mention he just happens to be of the Islamic faith? That's why I said it was a setup from the get-go. His dad's associated with radical Islamic terror groups. You might have caught that on alternative media, but you sure didn't get that morsel in the mainstream media. And I'm going to give you some news sources at the end of the presentation. You really need to pay attention to alternative news sources because you're not going to get this kind of stuff from the mainstream media. They decide what you'll hear. Everything is sanitized before you hear it. And that includes the beloved among evangelical Christians, Fox News. They get their news from the same source as everybody else. They just put a little different spin on it. And then, of course, we had Black Lives Matter movement. And that was as a result of the Mike Brown killing there in Ferguson, Missouri. And from that, then, was spawned some college campus unrest. And really, what Black Lives Matter and all of the college protests that are going on right now, what they all have in common is that it is a manifestation of cultural Marxism. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Here's one. I don't know if you were aware of this one or not. This is Melissa Click. She was a journalism communications professor at the University of Missouri. When Black Lives Matter came to the University of Missouri campus, some new words came into our, and I'll get to those in a second. Some new words came into our lexicon, such as microaggression. Anybody heard that phrase, microaggression? Anybody heard safe space? Safe space, microaggression. Well, Melissa Click actually got dismissed. She was fired. Because what she did, and this is a picture of her, demanding that a journalism student who was filming the protests stop filming and leave the area. And when the student journalist said, I've got every right to be here, I'm filming this, and she called for muscle. She said, who wants to come over here and help me remove this guy? Well, that went viral. See, now what happens when these Marxists do things like this? They think that they can just do these things in a vacuum and nobody will know. Well, this went viral. She shut down her Twitter account. She shut down her Facebook account. She shut down her LinkedIn account. Every way to contact her was shut down. It still didn't save her. The university was so embarrassed by this that they had to can her. Now, she's just symbolic, really, of what's going on our college campuses today. Here's a Pew Research Center survey, and that's one site that you may want to utilize if you're looking for data and statistics on surveys that are being conducted in America. Pew Research Center is a good source, and you can find that on the web. And they have all kinds of surveys, but this one in particular I just came across a couple of days ago. According to this newest survey, 40% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 24, 18 and 34, believe the government should be able to ban any speech that is offensive to minority groups. Now, there's a problem with that right off the bat, isn't there? That's not free speech, first of all. And secondly, who is it that determines what is offensive or not? The government with the input of minority groups. That sounds like a rigged game to me. What this means is the only free speech, and yes, this is a little sarcasm here, this perpetually offended generation supports is speech that they agree with. Do you understand that's not free speech? Do you understand people may say things to you that offend you? How many of you understand that we live in probably the most offended times that the world's ever seen? You can't look at somebody cross-eyed without them screaming that they're offended. Now, fortunately for other people, they've never told me that, because I would likely laugh in their face. We've seen new words enter our language, microaggressions and safe spaces. That's a result, really, of something that is called critical race theory. Critical race theory. This is going to make sense to you when I explain what that is, because it perfectly defines the culture that we live in today in America. Critical race theory, and you can look this up on your own, study it, understand it. Critical race theory was developed out of legal scholarship. So a bunch of lawyers got together. Now that should frighten you right off the bat. A bunch of lawyers got together and they came up with this idea that there is a thing called critical race theory or embedded racism. Now let me read this to you. Critical race theory recognizes that racism is ingrained in the fabric and system of the American society. The individual racist need not exist. Now, I'll read that again because it didn't make sense to me when I read it to myself earlier. The individual racist need not exist to note that institutional racism is pervasive in the dominant culture. This is the analytical lens that critical race theory uses in examining existing power structures. Critical race theory identifies that these power structures are based on white privilege and white supremacy, which perpetrates the marginalization of people of color. Critical race theory also rejects the traditions of liberalism and meritocracy. Legal discourse says that the law is neutral and colorblind. However, critical race theory challenges this legal truth by examining liberalism and meritocracy as a vehicle for self-interest, power, and privilege. So what they're saying is this: if you're any other ethnicity other than black or Hispanic or Asian, you're automatically a racist, whether you know it or not. Every institution in America has embedded racism, whether you see it or not. Do you understand? Can you see the issues that we might have as a free society with that kind of ideology and philosophy? And by the way, the reason I'm bringing this up is because that is what is behind Black Lives Matter. It is behind all of the campus uprising and unrest. It's behind safe spaces and microaggressions. You don't need to be aware of your language that's offensive to me. If I tell you a word that you use is offensive, that's good enough, and you need to back off. It's a way to shut down discourse and communication. How do you communicate with someone who says, well, you're white, so you're automatically a racist? How do you present the gospel in a culture that says you're automatically a racist because you're white? See, the bottom line for all of this, folks, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel uncomfortable, I'm tying this back into the fact that what has happened on our college campuses, and they are tomorrow's leaders, right? They're going to go into the workforce with this kind of an attitude. Let me give you an example in real time. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the CEO of Sam's Club, did you hear about this? The CEO of Sam's Club, who happens to be a black woman, had a meeting with one of Sam's Club's suppliers. And she sat down in the meeting and she looked around the room, and they were all white people. She had an issue with that. And she pretty much said, I don't think we can do business with a supplier that doesn't have diversity. So we're automatically disqualified because we happen to be of a particular race? That's upside down. We're not living in a colorblind society. In fact, critical race theory says there's no such thing as a colorblind society. Then what are we expending effort to achieve in this culture exactly? That's a brief look at what is going on our college campuses and what's behind critical race theory. And you knew this was coming. It's all paid for. Because listen, you can't leave your jobs and become a professional protester. Somebody's paying you some money, right? Does anybody know who that is? That's George Soros. Billionaire, Marxist. It is a known fact that he is funding Black Lives Matter. He is anti-American, anti-freedom, anti-liberty, and he's paying millions of dollars to these groups to do nothing but agitate 24/7. George Soros. What a gem. Political news. Remember when he made that statement? Yeah. Do you remember what they did to Bush when Bush said mission accomplished? They crucified him in the press. And they reminded him every day after that, oh, mission accomplished, huh? Well, another 50 deaths in Afghanistan. Mission accomplished, huh? Another. But it's not a big secret that the press in America have given President Obama a pass. Completely a pass. But you'll also notice here, see this? You ever wondered why, when he talks about what's going on in the Middle East, that he never says ISIS? He always says ISIL or IS. He always says ISIL. Why is that? What is he doing when he uses that and not ISIS? Well, I'll tell you what he's doing. He's signaling to his Muslim friends, to his Islamic friends, that I'm with you on this. ISIS stands for something, and ISIL stands for something. ISIL means the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Okay, so what, Mike? Well, what's the Levant? The Levant is all of that territory from southern Turkey down through Syria and Jordan and down into Egypt and to the coast of the Mediterranean Ocean, which includes what nation? Israel. So he's telling his Muslim friends, listen, I'm with you on this. The real goal is to establish an Islamic caliphate. And he's looking you right in the eye and saying it because he knows you can't do anything about it. So ISIS is contained, and then the next thing we know, we've got more terror here in America. And we could go on and on and on about that. How about, you remember that one? That was a college campus in Oregon. People have forgotten about this already, likely. Here's an eyewitness. An eyewitness that was there. Did you hear that in the media? The long and the short of it is this. He was approaching people with his gun and asking them, are you a Christian? And if they said yes, he shot them in the head. But that's just a random act of violence. That has nothing to do with Islamic terrorism. The growing dissatisfaction with the direction of this nation has led to this. Now, believe me, as the evening goes on, I'll have an opportunity to offend almost everybody in here. So if you're a Trump fan, no offense, I happen to like the guy. I really do. I don't think he stands a snowball's chance, but I happen to like him. Because he's saying things that the rest of us want to. Now, whether or not he's fit for office, that's a whole other conversation. But at least he's not drinking the Kool-Aid. And listen, as bad as you might think Donald Trump is, he's much better than either of those two. But, you know, we have a saying around here, and that is that there's really no difference between the R's and the D's. And that is Mr. Boehner and Ms. Pelosi. Yeah. What's going on around the world? What do we see in 2015? Well, Islamic terror in Paris twice. Charlie Hebdo, and then the latest, was that November? France has started to crack down finally, as they should. We also read that the former Israeli president, Shimon Peres, proposed that the Pope be named as the head of a brand new United Nations organization for global religion. I know all you prophecy folks are loving that. And of course, Pope Francis, I've already mentioned, he was here in September, and that's him speaking at the UN. And the greatest challenge that we face, he's right there along with our president, the greatest challenge we face as citizens of the world is climate change. It's a head scratcher to me how they can keep a straight face and say this stuff. The United Nations launched a major sustainable development agenda for the entire planet. You may have heard about that. There was the Paris climate meetings, and I may have another word about that before we're through this evening. And then a little known story, and I dug this one up when I was interviewing a guy from Australia for my podcast. And Visa ran a trial in Australia where they found enough citizens, Australian citizens, that were willing to take an implant in their hand, a computer chip in their hand, if it would make their shopping experience quicker. In other words, they could just go through and scan their hand and it would take care of the bill. Again, prophecy students are saying, what? Well, that kind of stuff's on the horizon, and in fact, there's a lot more than that going on. The thing that gives me pause about all of that technology, though, brothers and sisters, is that there's a lot of discussion right now about EMPs. A lot of conversation about EMPs. Paul and Adam particularly like that subject. EMP, by the way, is an acronym for electronic magnetic pulse. And what it means is, the theory is this: if they explode a nuclear device in the atmosphere, that radiation emitted from that nuclear device would fry the grids. It would disable, and Scott's an engineer, so he knows this. Electronics and controls control basically everything anymore. It's all automated, it's all electronic. Now, there's a few, we work at the refinery, there's a few manual kind of things, but even those are becoming controlled now. Can you imagine what would happen if an EMP went off and fried the entire grid? Well, there would be no power, and there would be no power for a long time, because something of that scope and magnitude, where are you going to get new parts or supplies from? And oh, by the way, it's going to fry your car computers, so they're not going to work. And so trucks aren't going to work that we use to ship things. Even locomotives that go by rail, those locomotives have electronics in them. They're not going to work. Try to think of something that you enjoy every day that isn't tied in some way to electricity. Well, you wouldn't have natural gas or propane delivered to you. So, but the point is this: with all this technology that's being developed, it's hard for me to believe that anybody would use an EMP device, because that would totally disrupt the entire economy of the United States. And believe it or not, as bad as it is, the U.S. economy still drives the global economy. So that's why it gives me pause. I think I'm not completely sold on it, although I am, you'll notice this logo right here. There is a task force that is a part of the Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security. There is a task force, and it is their goal to research and develop strategies and plans to address if an EMP would be used. And I've been blessed to schedule an interview with the head of this task force for Homeland Security. I'll be talking to him in February about EMPs. So that is going to be a great conversation. Okay, so what can we expect to see in 2016? How are we going to put all these puzzle pieces together and make sense of all of this? Well, here's what I see coming down the pike. The Royal Science Organization is the oldest scientific organization, continuous operation organization in the world. And this is British. This is the British Royal Science Organization. They're having a meeting in November of this year, and the working title for the meeting is this: New Trends in Evolutionary Biology, Philosophical and Social Science Implications. Now, this is a giveaway here. That is supposed to be a representation of the double helix, the DNA of every living thing. The Royal Science Organization and the scientists that belong to it and others around the world, they are presently, even now, involved in manipulating the DNA of different animals. What's the goal? Well, as you're going to see in a minute, the goal is us. Right now, there are organizations who are creating what are called transgenic animals. Transgenic animals. Now, scientists have been manipulating genes and DNA for quite some time, but they're actually stepping up the game, and it's starting to get a little concerning because when they reach a certain point, they're going to start trying it on humans. That's the goal. The goal is to do this on humans. And so that quite naturally leads to this quote: evolution is a spiritual process and makes us more godlike. Transhumanism. How many of you, well, let's do this in reverse. How many of you have never heard the word transhumanism? Transhumanism. Do some research on transhumanism. You're going to be shocked at what you find out. Transhumanism is a huge, huge area of study. And by the way, the guy that made this statement is Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil is the futurist and Google exec. He's a high-ranking member of Google. And everybody knows what Google is, right? It's a tracking device. So transhumanism is on the rise. Transhumanism, let me tell you this. This is the whole goal of transhumanism. This will come out in the next few slides. The goal of transhumanism, they're selling it that, well, you'll live longer and healthier lives. That's not the goal. That's the selling point. The goal is this. They want to transform human life into a machine. Think artificial intelligence, think cyborgs, think, in fact, I posted something on my Facebook page today that Pat Wood had put out on lifelike robots. Did anybody see that post? Did you look at that picture close? It's like, man, you'd have to get real close to know that that's not human. That's how good they're getting at this stuff. Right now, they're talking about brain uploads. They're going to take your identity. Who are you without your consciousness? Do you understand that everything that you are resides in your consciousness? What we call the mind. Well, what if they took your mind? In fact, isn't there a movie out right now, something similar to that? Transcendence. Wow, that's a name. That was no accident, was it? They're working right now, scientists, this man right here, they are working to figure out how to upload your consciousness to a robot. Do you know what that means? You would be the robot. If they could upload your consciousness to a robot, they don't have any need of you in the flesh. Now I know some of you are thinking, man, that's good sci-fi, Mike. No, that is exactly what is going on in labs all over the world today. You see, and here's the end game. The end game is that the elitists who control things, they are on record as saying, I think we have 8 billion people on the planet now, close to 8 billion. They're on record as saying it needs to be 3. Well, what's going to happen to the other 5 billion? Can you say intentional extermination? Let me find his name for you. I'll get that for you. Thank you. Yeah, and he wasn't familiar to me either, so the question was, who is that guy? So I'll have to find that name, and then I'll put it in the notes, because I'll post this and then put his name in the notes. So guys like this, though, they are working to upload your consciousness so they can get rid of you. Think about it. Because if you're a robot, you can be directed, right? And oh, by the way, if you're a robot, you're only going to use just a little bit of electricity to recharge. You don't consume any food, so you don't need to be taken care of that way. You can just be used as a servant. And I know people are saying, oh, that sounds crazy. No, that's exactly what's going on. What's the favorite saying around here? Your failure to be informed does not make me a wacko. The quest for artificial intelligence is going to continue to increase this year. Here's a name for you to look up and do some research on. Zoltan Istvan. Zoltan Istvan. Z-O-L-T-A-N. Istvan, I-S-T-V-A-N. Zoltan Istvan. He is a transhumanist philosopher and is the author of a lot of different books and articles. He, and I'll give you some resources to find some good conversations with Istvan. But he's really pushing this artificial intelligence thing, uploading your brains. I can envision people agreeing to do that. Do you mean to tell me I would still have all of my consciousness, all of my memories, all of my experiences, nothing would change, I'd still think I'm me, except I'd be in this, whatever you want to call that thing. No aches, no pains, no disease, no illness. Could you imagine people saying, I'll do that? But here's the reason, the real reason, in my opinion, besides wanting to reduce the population, the real reason that people like Istvan and other globalists are really pushing for transhumanism and brain uploading and all of that stuff is because they see it as a way around judgment. See, God created us, and he said the day's coming when all flesh will be judged. These transhumanists think, well, if we're not in the flesh anymore, what's to judge? Now, you would think they could have thought a little bit more through that process. New technologies. Now, how many of you understand that technology is always sold to us, that it's going to make our life easier, it's going to make life safer? Safer. Everybody wants to be safe, right? Right now, governments are buying up what is referred to as facial recognition software. Now, this is one thing that's interesting about the movies, about Hollywood, the people that pay for movies. They almost always tell you in advance what they're doing in the movies. I mean, we've been seeing facial recognition kind of stuff in Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise for 15 years, right? All kinds of espionage movies, you know, you stick your eye up there and they do the scan or whatever, you know. Well, maybe it didn't sound quite like that, but we've been seeing that forever, right? What, do you think they just pulled that out of the air and said, oh, this would be a neat gimmick? No. They include that in movies because it is existing technology someplace. They know that scientists are working on this. Well, here's the deal. Facial recognition software is being used right now in the UK, and the FBI right here in America has already bought the software, and as I speak tonight, they have a database of just over 51 million photos of you. Why would the FBI need a mugshot of this? Why would they need your mugshot? Why do you have GPS? Why do we need a GPS in our phone? Well, because I get lost without it, Mike. No. Why do you think you have GPSs in your phone? Well, because it keeps me safe. I never get lost. That's not why they have GPSs in your phones. Why do they have GPSs in your phones? Anybody? So they're tracking you. They know exactly where you're at, any day, any time, and they can pull up that database. That's why. Facial recognition software we should be screaming to high heavens about that. But we are not. And that's just another reason why we need to understand this stuff. So there's the bottom line. Transhumanism is going to spread rapidly. All this technology that we're seeing today, and again, folks, do your own research. You don't have to believe a word I'm telling you. You would be wise to, but you don't have to. You can search it for yourself. The stuff's out there. Transhumanism is going to be a major focus in 2016 and beyond. So are implants of all varieties. That one on the bottom is the one that they used in Australia. But this one right here, you know how they're breaking down our resistance to that? Animals, dogs, cats, and with our children. Oh, implant your children and that'll safeguard them against kidnappers. It's only a matter of time before adults say, yeah. I can envision the day in the not too distant future when EMTs will arrive on a crash scene and they'll have the little scanner in their hand, whoop, and there it is. There's all your medical stuff. Name, what you're allergic to. It's starting already. They're building a database on you, folks. Do you know that every time you get on the internet, you're giving that internet provider, really it's, well, I'll get to it in a minute. Every time you get on the internet and do a search, you're adding to your online profile. How many of you know you have an online profile? Yeah, you do. How many of you have ever experienced searching for something and then leaving that site, going to another site, and as you're on that site, boom, that thing you were just looking at on that other site pops up on the site you're on, and you go, how'd that happen? or they're following you from site to site. How do they do that? Well, they're doing it all behind the scenes. Well, why would they do that? Because businesses consider that to be very valuable data. They want to know what your buying habits are. They want to know what you're thinking about buying. We're living in a surveillance state. We are living in a surveillance state. When was the last time that you, those of you who live in Lima, do you know how many cameras are on top of the Meyer roof?
37.
Oh, I only counted 8. But the point is this, I was looking. How many cameras do they have that are looking at the parking lot? 24/7. And it's not just Meyer. It's Walmart too. It's the mall.
St. Rita's big time.
St. Rita's. Cameras everywhere. We've got cameras in our hallways at work. Yeah. And it's going to be increasing. It's not going away. I haven't seen it in any other small cities around here, but Lima's got cameras on top of their stoplights in a lot of different places. But you already understood that, right? You're being tracked 24/7? Well, Facebook's just social media. No. Listen, do you think Zuckerberg is worth $50 million because Facebook is just a place for you to go and swap pictures with your friends? Get real. You have got to be kidding me. Nobody's that naive. Well, but Facebook, they're just a thin veneer. I love this cartoon. Big Brother. Facebook says, get out of the way, you amateur. But who's behind it all? Google. Do you know that Google sells their data directly to the National Security Agency, the NSA? See, the NSA doesn't have to have spies like they used to. They still do. Feet on the ground is always valuable. But the NSA just goes right to Google and says, we want the data on this person or this city. And some of you are thinking, oh, they don't do that. Yes, they do. Do you remember the revelations about a year ago? Maybe it's 2 years ago now, when it became known that Verizon had given all of their caller information to the federal government? Do you know that Google, if you use Gmail, you know that part of the authorization when you said, yes, I've read the terms and conditions of usage and all this stuff, is that they're reading your mail. They are reading your mail. And oh, by the way, if you think well, that's not me because I got Time Warner. Time Warner is reading your mail too. There are no secret communications. Unless you happen to be Hillary Clinton and you use your own server. Oh,
Mike, what was the search engine that you...
Startpage.com. If you want to try and avoid all this, startpage.com is a great server, internet browser, because it's encrypted. It's encrypted. Now, it's going to go out and search Google and all those other places, Internet Explorer, for you, but it hides your identity. What is your identity online? Well, Google reads your IP address. You know, each individual computer has a specific IP address. They know, for instance, in my home, that we have 3, 4 computers operating sometimes. And they know that. And they can differentiate what Kathy's looking at to what I'm looking at. Well, that must be Mike. Searching for guns again. That's how they collect data and build your profile based on your IP address. And each computer, believe it or not, has a specific IP address. And I could let Kathy, because she's the IT expert in our bunch, and she would explain that very well. But Google collects that data and they sell it. The government is the biggest buyer. There's going to be, in 2016, I believe, an increased push to do away with currency. How many of you said when debit cards first came out, you said, well, I'm never going to use those? I did. I was one of those people that said, I'm not using that. I'm going to use cash. And then slowly but surely, employers started helping you to use your plastic card. How did they do that? Direct deposit. So it used to be I got my check on a weekly basis in my hand, and I went to the bank and I said, put this in and give me this much back. Doesn't work that way anymore. It goes directly into the bank. Now, that is going to increase because they want people using plastic. Why? How many of you have the new cards that have the chips? They are tracking you as you're walking through the mall. How many of you, and this cracks me up every time it happens, Kathy's got it on her phone and we just laugh. What's it called? Retail Me Not? As we're driving down Elida Road and we go past the mall, here's a bell. Kohl's coupon. Hobby Lobby coupon. I mean, right as we're going by it. Well, that's just coincidence. There aren't any coincidences. But cash is going to go bye-bye. But that's not, debit cards, that's just a stepping stone, you understand. They want to move you completely away from that, to where they're going to deposit credits into your account. And then as you use those credits, you better be wise with them, because if you use them up for the end of the month, you're going to go without. That's what Agenda 21 is all about, actually. Globalists are going to come out of the closet, and I should have brought the data with me, and I apologize for not. How many of you have heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership? If you haven't, go to Soaring Eagle Radio. There's my first shameless plug of the night. Go to Soaring Eagle Radio, episode 8. Episode 8, and I interview an economist called Jerry, his name is Jerry Robinson. Episode 8, and we talk about that, Trans-Pacific Partnership. How many of you remember NAFTA? How many of you were working in a factory when NAFTA came into being? Yeah. What happened when NAFTA came into being for you, Kathy? At Huffy's. The job went to Mexico. But you remember NAFTA was sold as this great deal for Americans. It's going to bring manufacturing jobs to America. It's going to increase our economy, and so on and so on and so on and so on. 1 million, and this is conservatively, 1 million manufacturing jobs were lost since NAFTA was passed. 50,000 manufacturing facilities have been shut down because of NAFTA. Automotive companies moved their plants to Mexico. Why not? They're paying UAW employees $35, $40 an hour, plus their medical benefit, all the legacy costs involved in their 401k and all these other things. At $35 an hour, you can double that for legacy costs. So it's costing them $70 an hour per employee to build that vehicle. Or they can go to Mexico, and they can pay those employees $5 a day, no benefits, and no retirement. What do you think they're going to do? That's a no-brainer. But it wasn't sold that way. TPP, they knew TPP was bad news. They, being the trade representatives for all of those countries, there's 13 countries there. And they're basically the highlighted ones, New Zealand and Australia, and then the Asian rim there, Thailand and Japan, Canada, United States and Chile. What it does, it's an end around national sovereignty. Now you got to understand this to really grasp the implications of what this is. And by the way, this was negotiated in secret. This was negotiated in secret. It was worse than Obamacare. Nancy Pelosi, when she's out of office, dead and gone, there'll be one statement that's going to live on for the rest of time that she's known for. And what is it? We got to pass the bill so we find out what's in it. Our Congress, senators and representatives, didn't even have a chance to do that. This was negotiated in secret by each of these nations' trade representatives. Here's what it does. It allows U.S. corporations from all of the countries that are involved, but we're only concerned about U.S. corporations. It allows U.S. corporations to offshore their manufacturing operation or their assembly operation or whatever business they're in and pay their folks whatever the prevailing rate is and not have to abide by, and this is why they're leaving America, not have to abide by EPA or OSHA, because there's no such thing as EPA and OSHA in many of these countries. What Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, does is it basically turns these other nations into slave markets. The United States worker cannot compete with $4 and $5 a day wages. Companies cannot compete in America with companies that go to Thailand because they don't observe EPA laws. There is no EPA in Thailand. You can pollute all you want to. Here's the real kicker for me, though. TPP allows companies, say a company from Thailand comes into America and they don't like the way that the local government is treating them, i.e. they make them abide by the law. There is a court that is going to be set up that has jurisdiction, legally binding jurisdiction over the complaints and the grievances that are filed, and our United States laws and government can't do a thing about the decision. It's binding. So a company from Thailand could come over here, and we don't like the way they're operating or doing business, and we could try to stop that or shut it down. They could file a suit with this court, and that court would stop us in our tracks. Now, is that crazy or what? That's what's coming with this. That's what's coming with TPP. Politicians will continue to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And the first time I saw this commercial, and I've seen it once since, I just shook my head. How many of you have seen that commercial? You know who's using that commercial? Hillary Clinton. And in the background, she's talking about how she's so pro-LGBT, HQRZIM, whatever. It seems like they add an initial that stands for something every other week. I can't keep up with it. That's how our politicians, that's how low they're stooping now. Climate change, it's the biggest scam going. Biggest scam going. It really is. Climate change, you remember a couple of years ago when Al Gore, the inventor of the internet, well, that's what he claimed, right? Al Gore was pushing for something called carbon credits. Remember what carbon credits were? Well, that hasn't gone away. They've just renamed it, repackaged it, and they've let the dust settle a little bit now. They're going to come back with it still. Carbon credits, this whole carbon footprint thing, it's why the state of West Virginia and other states that used to have a robust coal industry are hurting. It's why power, how many of your electricity bills have went up in the last year? You know why? Because Obama has passed rules and regulations that are shutting down coal-fired power plants. What's going to happen when they can't use coal and they've got to go to another source for their power plant? Well, they're not going to absorb that cost. They're going to pass it along to you, right? And that's exactly what's happening. So climate change is one of the biggest ruses ever. If you want to understand all that, what the Pope, the UN, the climate change, the Paris Accords, and all that kind of stuff, Agenda 21, we haven't even talked about that yet. If you want to understand all of that, get that book. Get Patrick Wood's book, Technocracy Rising. Adam, do we have any of these in the bookstore? You can get them on his website. Just search from Start Page, not Google, Start Page. Because if you search for enough of this stuff that I'm giving you tonight, if you search for it on Google, they're going to have you marked as some kind of radical domestic terrorist.
Might have a black SUV.
Yeah, you'll have a black SUV circling your cul-de-sac. Yeah. Okay. That's a great book, and that'll get you up to speed in a hurry. Okay. What's a prophecy update without Middle East, right? We got to do the hat tip. Middle East. War is escalating, most definitely. There's a map of Syria. You see all the things going on. And by the way, you understand that all these nations in the Middle East that are being the sitting president or king, whatever the case may be, they're being overturned and thrown out by the United States government. Do you understand that? They are. Iran, you know why Iran hates us so much? Well, let me give you the brief history. Iran had a democratically elected government with a prime minister in the 40s and the very late 40s and the early 50s. I know, that's hard for us to believe, isn't it? What do you mean? Iran's not always been, the Ayatollahs and the radical Islam? No. They had a democratically elected government, they had a parliament, and they had a prime minister. And then they made the fatal mistake. Mossad was his name. He was the prime minister. He decided he was going to take back from what became British Petroleum, the oil fields that British Petroleum had basically confiscated from the Iranians and really had taken all the profits. So Mohammed Mossad decided he was going to nationalize the oil fields, and guess what? British Petroleum didn't care much for that. And so they called the White House, and at the time it was President Truman. And they asked President Truman, we need to do something about this, so will you agree with us that we can go in and invade Iran? And Truman refused to do it. So they waited. And then in 1953, 1952, 53, we had a change of presidents. And Dwight Eisenhower came into the White House. And he gave his blessing. And so they went in and they toppled the government, and they used the CIA to do it. The CIA using black money. How many of you have heard of the Iran-Contra scandal? You know what that was? That was selling guns to the radicals, getting that money and buying drugs, and then using the drugs in the streets of America for money to pay, black budget, to pay for the CIA's covert operations. Now, I know some of you are looking at me like, I've got 4 eyes. You need to do your research. This nation has bloody hands when it comes to its foreign policy. And Iran was the first government that it toppled, but it is not the last. Guatemala came next. You remember Libya when Muammar Gaddafi was toppled? You know who was behind that? The United States government. Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, who's behind that? The United States. Why? Because they wouldn't play on our terms. Because they wouldn't play by our terms. And so we use the CIA and covert operations, selling weapons to this group, taking that money and buying drugs. The drug problem that we have in the United States today is a result of the CIA. Now, I interviewed a guy not long ago, and we talked about that very topic, drugs and the CIA. And I hope that I'm not shattering your Star-Spangled Banner, illusion of America being this bright and shining. We've got some skeletons in the closet. And the reason why most of those people in the Middle East hate us is because of what our government has done right under our noses that we're not aware of. So war is escalating in the Middle East. Iran is in Syria. Russia is in Syria. Many are making a lot of that, the Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38 and 9 prophecies of the coming end times war. Russia really has taken over as the power in the Middle East, and I just think this photo says a bunch. Notice, here's Putin. He's kind of got a half grin. Notice President Obama. That's a scorn. You know why? Because he just had his lunch ate. Putin's moved in with Russia. That's why this U.S. and this U.S. are both stone-faced. And look at the guy with Putin. U.S. had our lunch ate in the Middle East negotiations, especially the nuke deal with Iran. Wow, what a travesty that was. Israel's being systematically isolated. There is no superpower backing anymore. Canada just elected a progressive Marxist premier. His father was the prime minister many years ago. His name is Trudeau. And he has openly embraced accepting as many so-called Syrian refugees as can be had. That's how serious he is about overthrowing his government. The green folks are Muslim, Islamic-controlled nations. See that little red thing right there? That's Israel. The U.S. no longer backs Israel as a policy because of the president we have in office. Canada was their last hope. Britain has never been on Israel's side. The ISIS crisis, in my opinion, is a tool. It's a ruse. Now, I'm not suggesting that atrocities aren't being committed, because they are. But this whole ISIS thing, hopefully it's not a surprise to you that ISIS was created and funded by the United States. They were raised up as a radical group, as an insurrectionist group in some of these Islamic countries to cause issues and problems. And guess what? Just like any other terrorist group, they're going to work for the highest bidder. We lost control of that monster, and now we're paying the price. And the refugee invasion. Well, my viewpoint on this, and you may disagree, but my viewpoint is that this is being used as a tool to destabilize the United States. Causing us to focus on this, I think they're trying to ramp up to some kind of incident to give our government an excuse to, number one, take away guns, outlaw guns, or whatever, and number two, to suspend constitutional law and create martial law, or suspend the government and keep Mr. Obama in office. Take your pick. All of them are bad. ISIS, the point is a tool. In all of this, I see the rise of the spirit of Antichrist in all of it. That's the only way to explain all this, is it's demonic. It's demonic. But Israel, they have been idle. Did you know Israel's been bombing Damascus and areas around Damascus, trying to take out some of the artillery and weapons sites, some of the missile sites? Yeah, they're doing it right now. So they're not sitting still. So we're seeing Bible prophecies concerning Israel beginning to manifest. Well, in a sense, yes, but I don't think we're quite there yet. What I do see, though, and this is a praise, folks, what I do see is I do see an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, because also what you're not reading in our press is the number of Muslim people that are coming to faith in Jesus Christ. It's amazing, the numbers that are coming to faith in Jesus Christ, that are experiencing dreams and visions, that are somehow ending up with Bibles, that have people that are talking to them about Christ and the gospel. Many thousands of Muslims are coming to faith in Christ. That's the untold story. One thing that we are seeing is that Allah is being overrun and overshadowed in his own lands. And I find that especially joyful. One of the things that you may be familiar with, a phrase that's heard often during Islamic terrorist attacks, is Allah Akbar. Allah Akbar. You know what that means? Well, it's up there. It literally means Allah is the greatest. Allah is the greatest. Now, what I find interesting is that Muslims, whether they're Sunni or Shia, are coming to understand, wait a minute, if Allah is the greatest, why are we all fighting against ourselves and killing each other and killing other people? If Allah is the greatest, how can this be happening? And it's creating some cognitive dissonance, if you will, among Muslims, and they're beginning to understand that no, Allah is actually demonic. If he is commanding these things, he's demonic. And they're turning to Christ. An amazing development. I won't even read that because I'm not going there. Last days church. What's going on today in the church? That's a very good question. Here's a quote. You can read it, and then I'll entertain suggestions as to who said it. And I'll read it for our online viewers. You ask me if the God of the Christians forgives those who don't believe and who don't seek the faith? I start by saying, and this is the fundamental thing, that God's mercy has no limits if you go to him with a sincere and contrite heart. The issue for those who do not believe in God is to obey their conscience. Sin, even for those who have no faith, exists when people disobey their conscience. Who might have said that? The first Jesuit, hat tip to Johnny, to ascend to the papacy. Here's another statement that he just made recently, which was very interesting to me. It's a quote. We are close to Christmas. There will be lights, there will be parties, bright trees, even nativity scenes, all decked out, while the world continues to wage war. While the world starves, burns, and descends further into chaos, we should realize that this year's Christmas celebrations, for those who choose to celebrate it, may be their last. Is he privy to some information that I found that very interesting statement. Mysticism, paganism, spiritualism are continuing to rise. We focus here in America on the lightweights. We occupy our time too much with people like Joyce Meyer, Benny Hinn, Kenneth Copeland, and all those prosperity teachers. Listen, how many times do we need to call them false prophets and heretics? Just move on. There's bigger fish to fry, and this is it right here. Because while we're worried about all these people that are saying, well, I need a jet for ministry, now what you need is a real ministry and not just a Honeywell. Creflo Dollar. The world is gathering together to figure out how can we come up with a religion, a basic faith that everybody can agree to. You know what there's only one thing that has to go in order for all the world's religions to agree together. You know what that one thing is? Jesus. Jesus. People don't care. They'll accept a Christless Christianity. And Christless Christianity has no teeth. Brothers and sisters, do not run from the truth that Christianity is a very narrow, exclusive faith system. It is narrow and exclusively focused on Jesus Christ. He is the only way to God. He is the one and only Savior. He is God in the flesh. And without Him, without faith in Him, people are going to bust hell's gates wide open. And we cannot lose that message. But the Parliament of World Religion says if you'll just get rid of that, everything will be fine. Well, yeah, but Christ prophesied that, didn't He? He said, I am and will be a rock of offense and a stone of stumbling. Murdering humans is good business, and harvesting body parts is very lucrative. We were exposed to that this year, weren't we? That's not going to go away. How many of you thought that Congress was actually going to defund? I didn't for a second. There's no way they're going to defund that debauchery. See, the real war on women that the demo-Nazis are so proud of throwing in people's faces, the real war on women is waged with the support of American politicians on both sides of the aisle. If Republicans really wanted abortion to be outlawed, that would have been done years and years ago. But they're not interested in that. And I put these two slides in here for a reason. That is a little hand and arm. That's gruesome, isn't it? That's a human head right there. That's the result of what's going on. And by the way, that's 11 weeks. 11 weeks. There's 24 weeks. 60 million human babies murdered since Roe v. Wade. 60 million. Planned Parenthood as an organization is an abomination. And I can't say it clearer than that. Planned Parenthood is an abomination. They are guilty of the organized ritual of child sacrifice. The answer to that, though, is evolutionism, and we'll talk more about that. What else is going on in the church? Well, apostasy is rising. You probably don't know her, and you didn't hear a lot about her. But that lady is the Bishop of Stockholm, Eva Brun. And she is the first bishop in Sweden who is openly lesbian. Actively, openly lesbian. And who can forget this a couple of weeks ago? Anybody see this on Facebook? Silent Night performed as a burlesque number by the Hillsong, I will not say worship team, but by those who pretend to be God worshipers. Now, this same Hillsong organization that allowed a known homosexual to function as their worship leader in the New York church until the news became known, and then they acted like, well, we didn't know anything about this. And by the way, that's his boyfriend there who was in their choir, and they've announced their marriage. Leading worship in a church? And then there's Chrislam. What is Chrislam? Well, it's this move by some evangelifish to meld Islam and Christianity together. Who's one of the biggest proponents? Pope Francis, and on the right, Rick Warren. And what are they promoting? Well, they're saying, and this is a quote from Pope Francis, Jesus Christ, Jehovah, Allah. These are all names employed to describe an entity that is distinctly the same across the world. Rick Warren buys into that, brothers and sisters. The state of the mainline church is a mess today. In fact, it's just flat out apostasy. The Bible tells us this, do not be bound together with unbelievers, for what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness, or what harmony has Christ with Belial, the devil, Satan, demons, or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? In 2016, the faithful remnant will be increasingly persecuted, in my opinion. There's a statistic there, and that's from Voice of the Martyrs. In 41 of the 50 worst nations for persecution, Christians are being persecuted by Islamic extremists. And our president wants to import them here. And many of our brethren, shockingly, are saying, well, we should do that because that's what love would do. And say, no, that's what a brainless zombie would do. Would allow people to come into your nation who are sworn enemies and have said they want to kill you. It's just insane. Just crazy. Terrorism is going to increase in America. There's sleeper cells all over this country, folks. And the U.S. government is going to be behind most of it. That is a logo, Information Awareness Office. That is a division. The Information Awareness Office is a division of the U.S. government, a division of DARPA. DARPA is a defense research arm that is engaged in coming up with new technologies for the military. But this total information awareness has to do with developing technologies to monitor citizens, you and I. It has no military benefit that you can see on the surface, but it has great benefit to a government who's trying to control its citizens. And there it is, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This program, Total Information Awareness, gives them the ability and the authority to monitor your transactions, be they email, cell phone, banking, any kind of electronic communications are subject to the U.S. government looking at them. Now, just in case you think, well, why would they want to see anything from me? Well, here's what they consider to be a threat in America, and you probably won't be able to read this unless you're sitting up here with Dustin and Mike. And here's what the U.S. government considers to be a threat. Anyone who talks frequently about the Constitution or ill of this government. Did that leave out anybody in here? You are considered suspicious or a domestic terrorist if you support the idea of a constitutional militia. if you think it's within our rights to have a constitutional militia. If you fight against anti-gun legislation or own several guns. Boy, that nailed a lot of you. If you support state sovereignty. If you think that the Federal Reserve is destroying our economy, you might be a radical. If you talk about the New World Order or global government, you might be a radical. If you discuss the economic collapse as a reality in the U.S. If you speak out against the IRS, well, that would be about 90% of Americans. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, if you think that with all these issues facing the church in America, most of our leaders, and I found this article, and I'll share it with you briefly. With all of these things going on, you would think that our church leaders, those that are recognized leaders, that they would respond with at least one thing on this list. But I got to tell you, they did not. Listen to what 10 recognized church leaders describe as the issues the church faces in 2016. Here's one. Evangelicals in 2016 will regroup as some shakeout continues in the movement. However, the shakeout will actually produce a more robust evangelicalism. So they're worried about the health of evangelicalism. After all this I've just showed you. Here's another one. I expect we'll see a continued rise in both connectivity via expanded digital infrastructure and more easily accessible technology. What? You think the biggest issue facing the church in 2016 is that we have the right technologies. Here's another one. In 2016, seeker, attractional, weekend-driven churches will continue to increase in attendance. I'm not going to bother you with the rest of it, but that blew my mind. These are 10 well-known Christian leaders in the evangelical church, and with everything going on in our culture, those are the things they think are the biggest challenges in 2016. I think that defines being a zombie. The only explanation for this is Jesus' words. False Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Now, this is for our online viewers and guests tonight. And I talked to many people on this very thing. Many people. I've got a lot of contacts in the last 6 months from people that listen to the podcast. And it's this: if you're part of a church that does not teach the Bible and does not take seriously obeying the Lord, here's the question: why are you still there? Why are you still there? Come out of that place and find a Bible-teaching, Bible-believing, and God-honoring fellowship. Your spiritual life depends on it. So what's ahead for us? Let's wrap this up and then I'll take some questions. What's ahead for Calvary Chapel Lima? What is our focus going to be in 2016? Well, there's 5 points, and they all lead to other things. The first and second commandment. What are the first and second commandment? Love God and love people. That should be our focus. Judgment, mercy, and faith. Kind, tenderhearted, and forgiving. Good stewards of God's grace so bountifully. Those should be our primary focus. And how are we going to carry that out? What will they look like when we go out in the communities? Well, for one thing, in 2016, we want to become more actively involved in abolitionism. And for you, those of you who want to know what that is, go to the AHA website. There's all kinds of information back there on the table. In fact, I don't think he would call himself the director, but he is the primary spokesperson. Russell Hunter. There will be an interview with him released on my podcast Sunday morning. So you can look for that Sunday, and there'll be more information coming. In 2016, we want to start or restart several different outreaches. nursing homes. I've talked to Paul and Adam about going downtown and talking to people about Christ and just passing out tracts and sharing the gospel. We want to refocus on kids' hope. Refocus on kids' hope. If you want to get involved in that, then now's the time. Now's the time to do that. We really need to be promoting the radio station. Do you know what a tool that is? 24/7 gospel preaching and teaching. Now I know I hope that you're listening to it, but encourage other people to listen to it. And it doesn't matter where they live because they can stream the programming online. Just give them the website and say, man, you got to listen to this radio station. And then right along with that, Kathy is really building up the Calvary Chapel of Lima YouTube channel and putting out all of the teachings, the video formats of the teachings are out there on the Calvary Chapel of Lima YouTube channel. We need to point people to that resource. There are a lot of opportunities to serve God here. And so the question that you need to ask is, what role are you going to fulfill? What were you going to fulfill? And as promised, there's some good sources of information. I'd be happy to send these to you in an email if you let me know you want to receive them. But if you're looking for places to go to get news and information, here are some great places to start. A View from the Bunker. Derek Gilbert's podcast is excellent, and he has a wide variety of guests on there, and it will be information that will be very useful to you. That's vftb.net, viewfromthebunker.net, vftb.net. Prepper Recon is a great podcast. In fact, he made the list of our Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, the sites that she wants to shut down. That's how good that is. And I'll be sending you a date because we chatted. We did an interview here a couple of weeks ago that he said he's going to release, be the first one in the new year. And so you'll want to listen to that. But that's prepperrecon.com. Prepper Recon. Then Carl Tykrib. Carl has talked about for 20 years, as long as I've known him, he's talked about globalism, he's talked about transhumanism, he's talked about all these things. ForcingChange.org. ForcingChange.org is Carl Tykrib's site. And then Patrick Wood, the book that we talked about, Technocracy Rising, is, and his website is technocracy.news. Technocracy.news. And that's just 4. I can give you many, many more. But if you start listening to these folks, you're going to get information that nobody else is going to have, likely in your family, and you'll be able to engage them on topics, and you'll have answers to things that they're just going to look at you like, how'd you find that out? How do you know that? Where'd you get that information? Spread this stuff far and wide to folks, people. And that's probably all that you're able to stand for one evening, so we'll just do Q&A. We could have went on and on and on and on, but I didn't want to sit up here and talk to myself. So, if you have questions, please go to the microphone so that our online listeners can hear the question as well. Any questions about anything that we've covered tonight? People are afraid to prolong it. All right, well, we're going to pray and close, and I appreciate your patience. I hope that this didn't come out like trying to get a drink of water from a fire hose. There's a lot of things going on in our world today. A lot of things that folks don't want you to connect the dots on. They don't want you to understand what's going on, because somebody who's awake and sees what's going on is a warrior in the kingdom. Because they're not just going to lay back and take this stuff. They're going to stand up and they're going to talk about it. And they're going to educate and inform people. And of course, the reason that we care is it all leads back to the cross of Jesus. Because the only escape from all of this is salvation through faith in Christ. That's the only thing that's going to spare anybody. And that's what we want to continue to remind people. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this information. Thank you for continuing to encourage us to to understand and comprehend, and then, Lord, to put feet to our faith by proclaiming the gospel of Jesus, by giving people answers to all the things that are very confusing in our nation and world today. Lord, you have all the answers. You want people to have them. And so thank you for preparing us to do exactly that. Thank you for this body of believers, Lord, that you continue to sustain. We love you, Father. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.